65 years ago, distinguished leaders in education and business convened in Meadow Brook Hall's Christopher Wren Room. These sessions, deemed Meadowbrook Seminars, birthed the philosophy and outline of the curriculum for MSUO, now Oakland University. Starting in 1957, 5 Meadowbrook seminars were held to consider the curriculum in business administration, education, engineering, liberal arts, and continuing education. The founder of Oakland University, Matilda Dodge Wilson, encouraged participants to think through what a modern university should be, forming the institution's foundation. The Christopher Wren Room hosted this historic event, with its carved plaster ceilings, airy bay windows, and golden chandeliers. The dining room encompasses some of the estate's most masterful features and original artwork, designed in the neoclassical style of famed 17th century architect Sir Christopher Wren, who is best known for St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Today, Oakland University gathers leaders from southeastern Michigan and across the country for another Meadowbrook seminar in the historic Christopher Wren Room to once again discuss the future of higher education, but this time from the vantage point of 2025.
Welcome to the Meadowbrook Seminars Reimagined. I'm Dr. Graham Harper. I'm Dean of the Honours College here at Oakland University. In just a moment, I'm going to welcome David Jesse, who will be moderating the Meadowbrook Seminar this afternoon. David is a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and we're thrilled to have him here moderating the discussion today. Make no mistake, this is an open discussion. When the Meadowbrook Seminars first occurred in 1958 and 1959, there were no prepared statements. Nobody was sent an invitation that said they had to stick to a script. The topic was higher education, what it is and what it can be. And almost 66 years later, that is the topic today. I want to thank our colleagues here at the wonderful and historic Meadowbrook Hall, and welcome the equally wonderful, but not so historic, David Jesse from the Chronicle of Higher Education.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite, and welcome to all of you who are joining us on Zoom, whether it is now, watching live, or down the road, or a few days, or months, or years as this makes into the archives. We had a great conversation this morning with this group about this topic, and I'm excited for you to sit and listen to some of the continuation of that. But I thought as we got started today, I'd start with a question for Dr. President Peskovitz, and wonder, maybe you could give us a little context. What is higher education today? What's its purpose? What is it actually doing? And then we can spring forth from that.
Well, it's a great question. I think of higher education as really trying to, when I think about maybe our vision here at Oakland University, we really want to take students and unlock the potential of every individual and impact the world by really using the transformative powers of education and research. And that's what we really think education is about. And that's what we try to do here at Oakland, and that's what I think higher education is about nationally.
I'd ask the same question to the rest of the table. As you think about college or university, higher education, what do you think of? What comes to your mind about where we're at today? And then we'll jump forward 25 years and think about it then. And if you're all quiet, I'll start calling on people.
I think it's a place to prepare you to make a difference in the world. That by the quality of your experiences, both academically and in non-academic spaces, that learning milieu allows you to really go out and make a difference, unleashing what it is you have been given to make a difference in the world.
I think perhaps it's a place to build networks of people that are similar or maybe a little different, but all willing to put the foot forward and try to drive some type of difference in the world. So building the network, I think, is a big component of it.
Okay. I was going to say, I think it's a place where you have varied experiences, in some cases more specific to see if that's an area you wish to pursue, in some cases more general, more liberal arts, a place where you can understand who you want to be a little bit better.
I was going to say the same thing. It's about trying to discover who you are. And you talk about meeting people and your attitudes, your opinions, your life viewpoints, your lenses change during that process because of the experience you have in higher education. And so I think it's a period of huge discovery. You can think you want something until you get exposed and realize you really want something else, and this gives you the opportunity to do that.
I want to build on what Ken said and say I think it is also a time of discovery for oneself, who you are and how you relate to the people that you're meeting, many of whom may come from very different walks of life or cultures. I also think it is an opportunity for inspiration and aspiration and creativity. And I see all of those in the higher ed realm, and I think those are all qualities that should be brought to any endeavor.
And I would add only that I think the value of doing it inside of an educational institution, because you can certainly develop yourself other places, is that it's guided discovery, right? It's more difficult to understand how to find all the information you might want to find without a curator, and higher education helps provide that.
I agree with all the descriptions. My own undergraduate institution was a Catholic liberal arts college, and we talked about the whole person education. And I think that also extends into the future, that the education that students are receiving today, here at Oakland University, they'll carry that for the rest of their lives. And so they're only here for a short period of time, but it shapes their whole future and their aspirations going forward.
It's a great opportunity to lay the foundation for a growth mindset, because we're developing the full person here, not just preparing them for a career. And there are times when career gets hard, or life gets hard, parenting gets hard. And it's an opportunity to learn a bit more about yourself. And I think that we establish a safe environment for students to explore some of those early growth opportunities so they can land on their feet regardless of discipline.
Well, building on what Kathy said, in some ways it's about expanding horizons, and you can't do that without structure because you don't know what you don't know. And the college setting is a place where you learn about things you've never thought of before. Whether it's career paths or personal growth or all of those things together.
I also think it's a place of risk and discovery, risk in a good way. Being in a large institution, I attended Michigan State as an undergrad, and being able to navigate systems successfully, and also knowing that you have professors that are not just there to provide lecture and syllabi, et cetera, but they are people that you can build relationships with and mentoring, but you have to be willing to take those risks and step into those unfamiliar environments.
And self-advocate.
Yes.
We have a couple students with us. I'd be curious in their answer, what is higher education to you? What do you think of when you think of higher education?
From what I heard from everybody else, I would like building upon that, just instead of looking at higher education as solely just education and just pursuing a degree, I see it as more opening your mind up to, like everyone said, new experiences, meeting new people. I mean, coming from in high school, I really thought I knew everything and I was with a diverse group of people. And then coming to college, it's a wave of something new. Even though Oakland University is one of the smaller schools, I still have seen so many new people gain so many new experiences. And I've learned so much more than just I'm gonna graduate this May. I've learned so much more than what my degree has given me, and I've experienced so much more by putting myself out there, because higher education, it does give you those experiences, but you as a student have to take that step and take that leap and put yourself out there. But yeah.
And we live in an age where, like, I don't need to necessarily come here for job training, right? Anything I could want to learn, I could look up. But as people have said, it's kind of, how do you know what you don't, how do you know what you don't know? How do you know what you need to know? And I think that's what I get a lot of value out of having an education for.
You mentioned anything you can learn, you can look up, which is true, right? Google is our friend, right? Even archives, digital stuff, various classes. So my next question would be, do we have this conversation in 25 years? We're all back here sitting around this table, or there's a different group here. Are universities around? Are they different focuses than what we just heard you talk? Or at the core, are they going to be basically the same mission that you guys have just spent the last 5 minutes talking about?
It seems like these are eternal questions, that they're not just for the moment or for 25 years, that we iterate all the time, and in response to the world around us, and projecting forward for not just how we need to react today, but planning for the future to be proactive. So I kind of see this as an eternal question, that, this would be a question that universities ask themselves all the time, and not limited to this moment or a moment 25 years from now.
Well, I would go back to Graham's introductory comments this morning about universities and going back to the 1600s in Europe, and it does seem like it's an eternal question, and that there are some commonalities, at least between then and now, about what we are providing, right? What our deliverables are, in a way to one way to think about it, and it is all of those things that you mentioned. But I'll spin it just a little bit and say, I think we are all preaching to the choir here. We're the converted, right? And in many ways, we're not the audience for what a university is going to be in 25 years, right? And we talked about some of the problems, I'm sure, that we'll get into later in the discussion. We talked about them this morning. So, there are folks out there who just don't have the same view about what a university provides. There are those folks who say, I'm going to get X degree, I'm going to get Y job, and that's it. And I think that is too narrow of a view, because I think everybody's right, but I think we need to keep that in the back of our minds as we talk about evolution.
Well, if we look in the future, if we look 25 years from now, I want to bring something up. 25 years from now, artificial intelligence is going to be so advanced, I think, to the point where we don't even know now. Artificial intelligence just has, within the past 2-3 years, has advanced a considerable amount. And I think if we think of university in 25 years, we have to think about the potentials of artificial intelligence in universities. I know that right now, Oakland University doesn't have a universal, university-wide policy on AI. 25 years from now, there might be one. There probably will be one. I want to see, it's a good thing to think about, will AI be the leaders of teaching in universities? Will we still have those in-person, professors? Will those roles die down and be taken by AI? How will students be using AI? Students use AI right now. How AI learns from humans and learns from what humans ask it to do. So my thing is, when we look at 25 years in the future, we have to consider the benefits and the costs of AI to the future of university.
So go ahead, Richard, and then Greg.
So, South Dakota State, we're actually struggling with AI, Gen AI policies, and trying to answer that question. One of the things that comes up in the literature is that people say, don't be afraid of AI. AI won't replace you in your job, but someone who knows how to use AI will probably replace you. And so there'll always be, a human element there, and maybe not, it's 25 years ahead, but moving forward, we still think, we talked about this morning, about the human connection and the importance of that there'll be some human element associated with AI and higher ed, but we'll have to sort of discover that, back to discovery for ourselves when it gets there, which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, if we were just simply reproducing a tradition, I would be very nervous about the future of higher ed. But because that horizon is open, there's something invigorating about that.
It's interesting because it does, we hear AI is going to take our jobs, but I think it speaks to the need for maintaining expertise, because it's not the AI, it's the people who can use AI effectively are going to be great at it. But we still, especially in higher education, we produce knowledge, we verify knowledge, and the AI is not going to be correct. Maybe they get stronger down the road in some of the developments that are happening with agentic AI. But I think that we still need to maintain high level of expertise to be able to use those tools effectively and ethically.
25 years from now, it's pretty far to future past. But if you follow the AI curves, first of all, just a quick comment on AI, we'll probably be past the agentic age, probably into physical AI. So the world will likely look quite different, where it's not just generative, which is what everybody's reacting to today. We can look at AI as a capability of how does it affect the profession or the skill set of education. We can also look at it as a disruptive force to education and to say things like, what's the purpose of higher ed and the university relationship? Those are two separate things. They're currently connected, but they could be separated. Education could take place outside of a typical structure called a university. So you have to think about that. And the environment, right now, we had this conversation this morning about the humanities, and the general purpose of education is to directed towards humans. Well, could we imagine that there's a time in the next 25 years where the purpose of education is not only to instruct and educate humans, but also to educate machines and educate how those two parties work together with one another? And so the paradigm shift is substantial. But I would, you started the question series a little bit of how does it change? I'd suggest that the purpose of education is likely going to stay the same, but we have to really focus more on the what's and the hows that's going to be achieved given the new environment that we're living in.
I think that we've been talking about humanity this morning and today. I think even if we're educating machines, they're still going to serve humans, or that should be the ideal.
I sure hope so, yeah.
So humanity is the transcendent aspect, whether people are at the core of all of this. And while there is AI, there are still the things that are unique to humans, like touch and sight, and not everyone has that, but in general, to serve our humanity. And so I think that's something that we have to consistently think about, is how is education influencing our ability to connect with one another, or does our ability to connect one another make education?
I think, as you all talked earlier, the structure of coming together around learning, I think that's going to be here, but it's what that looks like. We won't have geographical limitations anymore. There may not be physical buildings, but to bring people together versus me go on Google myself and think that I can educate myself just by using Google, I think that there will be a broader, but a structural that like you said, somebody's got to teach AI, or the things that we will be living with. Some human taught somebody how to do that, or programmed that machine how to do it. So education will be here. It's just the form it's going to take and what it's going to look like will be dramatically different than it does now. And 25 years is a long time for me to imagine with the rapid change of technology in this country now. When we talk about computers, I think that's going to look like an antiquated piece of equipment in 25 years. We'll have it in a museum someplace. And so it's really hard, but I just think the bringing together and the teaching, I think that's going to be here. It's just the form it's going to look like. It's going to be completely different than it is now.
Dave? I think there's a positive correlation between the vitality of the university and its ability to hear from not just the students and how they see their experience being valuable to them and cost efficient, but the other is the ability to hear from those you're engaged with in the community. But I also think that what you give to students in the years ahead to allow them to know the other, part of this region, there's a lot of us that just don't know the other, and I think how to transcend this growing polarization, so we can really engage the other in effective ways, other than to surrender to just this divisiveness that we see. And it's not new to this time. Human nature is a constant, right? But the university is a place where you can really come to know people from completely different backgrounds and care about them, eh? So.
One thing that I think will be the same is that there will be no shortage of problems to solve. I think that today, we know what problems there are out there in so many different fields to solve. And in some ways, one of the things that we do in higher ed is to educate our students on how to become productive citizens and to go out into the world and to solve those problems. In 25 years, as we've been talking, the tools will be different. In some ways we can envision them, but in many ways I think what we're all saying is we can't even begin to imagine what those tools will be. But there will be problems to solve, and there will be new tools to solve them. And I think there will be some form of higher education to try to educate young people on how to solve those problems. And there will be a need for some form of higher education institution to try to educate the future generation, young people, to go out there and to solve those problems. And it is going to be through education and discovery that we're going to want to educate the next generation as well. So we'll be, I think, and I hope, citizens of a global world. And I think that global world, I think, as you're saying, will be smaller.
So how does higher education talk to folks about its value, about why it's important to be around to solve problems, why it's important for students to spend 4 or 5 or 6 or how many ever years in an institution like Oakland? It seemed for a long time it was an economic argument, a strict economic come, and you're going to make $1 million more, or you're going to make $2 million more over the course of your life. I don't know that resonates as well. We talked a little bit this morning about the economic advancement argument isn't holding sway, but in getting people here, but the economic cost is dissuading some folks from going to college. But I wonder, how do you convince, and we'll come back to the cost thing, but talk to me a little bit about value of higher education. Why is it important for my son who's 14 years old to come to higher education? Or maybe it's not. How do you talk to them about that? How do you talk to them about that? How does higher education advocate for itself for being around for 25 years from now? Or does it not need to?
I'll speak first, but I feel like I'm cheating because we had such a lively discussion around it this morning, so I apologize to anybody whose thoughts that I'm borrowing too heavily from. But this concept this morning that was spoken about around the imbalance, first of all, of the cost, which is kind of individualized or family cost, to return. Sometimes it's societal return, or the length of time it takes to recoup the cost and get a return on this is something that I think needs to come into play. And that is a financial aspect that I think is at the core a bit of value, because it's value to whom and cost to whom. So I think that's part of the answer, is asking those two slices of the question.
I wonder if, because people have gone there, and I think it's interesting, David, that the human-centeredness of the whole enterprise keeps coming up in different ways, whether it's about the impact of AI or whether it's just generally what the value is. And I think that notion of the human-centeredness becomes also a question, does the higher, which is often, I think, throughout history of higher education, the higher has meant things that are significant to humans. That higher word, I mean, you've got the standard kind of in nations that are able to get education for their populations, it goes through a kind of standardised point, the point at which the higher is an additional optional element. And the higher is always connected with something about humans, and I think the higher in that sense also means deeper. And I think that's the conversation that we're talking about, whether it's about AI or about 25 years in the future and just what it looks like generally is, it's the difference between like and love, right? So we're talking about something here that's about love, not about like. And I think that's ultimately it. It's a higher version that's also deeper in education terms.
Do you think that means scarcity, though, as well? I mean, we talked about that this morning a bit. Of higher education is more scarce to larger populations a bit. And do you think that holds true as we go forward? As you think about higher and deeper, is a smaller group of people that can either afford to, or in time or money, go higher and deeper?
I think it's that point about access in terms of where people can get educated in not necessarily the older version of what a higher education experience looks like. And that's maybe the 25-year question. How does it shift, change, or match people's lifestyles as lifestyles change? And I think that ultimately, as we begin to say, access to a version of that higher and deeper may spread wider. At the same time, it may be different in how it spreads and what it actually does to do that spread. So I think we may be talking about, I won't say an explosion, but we're certainly talking about some of the structures not looking valid for what will occur in society as we move forward. And in that case, questions about the structural aspects of the institution when it's located in a place and it's located in a building, and those are big questions, I think. But it also then possibly goes back, Greg, to what you're saying. Does that mean more people get access? Is it okay? I think it's 39% of Americans between 18 and 24 come to college now. I think it's roughly that, although different groups have different access. But is that the right number, or should it be 95%? I think we've still got those questions to think about.
We touched on this morning a little bit. We talked about the economic advantage, the $1 million answer. But the other measure is social mobility and economic mobility. Sometimes that does translate into dollars earned, but sometimes it just translates into people pursuing their dreams. So, for instance, I'm at a land-grant university, and in the Moral Act, it says the university is there to serve as an educational benefit for the children of those who toil. So it was a way to sort of transform the social landscape and give people opportunities that they wouldn't ordinarily have. And I think it was David mentioned it today, different institutions serve different needs. So you have the land grant and you have other institutions. And so it's a very segmented ecosystem, I guess. But I think back to Graham's point, there's always going to be a question of the breadth of access, but then also the role those institutions play in terms of the structure and how they get access based on their positions in society.
I think access is extremely important, and I think it will take, as higher education evolves and as the laws of our land even, and people fight for that access can be broader and take different forms to make it accessible for as many people who want it as possible. And I would just say, when it comes to, though I had struggles convincing the argument I had with my son, but when it comes to women, I have no problem talking about the value of higher education, specifically at the school that I went to. And I'll say that I knew that I was going to a school that was going to give me a great education. That was a given. I know that I was going to have great professors. That's not the only reason I chose that school. It's because of what they were going to be able to give to me in terms of character building, to who I was going to become as a woman after that was over, the commitment to community service, the commitment to giving back, the pride. It gave me all of that. It doesn't mean that my parents didn't start it, but they kept cultivating it, and I was a group with other people who helped give me that. And so it was beyond the classroom. And so those are the relationships that I have now to this day, that are now 50 some years old, that are still very close to me. So it gave me that, in my perspective of the community and the culture and what's going on in my environment. It helped cultivate all of that beyond me getting a psychology degree from Spelman College. Spelman College helped build who I am as a woman now.
I think, something that we've been talking about is whether there's a physical location, and there are all kinds of organizations that are teaching. I work in a museum. I think a lot of our duty is to teach, and it's also a place of research and innovation and creativity. I think many of the qualities that we associate with universities. One of the things about a site-specific university, though, is it's actually an immersive experience. And, we tend to think of an immersive experience as something, you go to, you pay an admission or whatever. And that's one kind of immersive experience. The other is learning from other people, in addition to your coursework. I have often thought of universities and museums as time machines, because they transport you to the past. They may project you into the future. They can bring you cultures of all kinds. I mean, I work in an encyclopedic museum, so that's certainly the case. But an institution with a broad liberal arts education does the same. And so, again, I like to think of it as immersive. This is your opportunity to experience various aspects of culture, of history, of interpersonal relationships.
That word immersive, I think, is something that we haven't heard, certainly today, through this morning. And it's not one that I've heard either around the debate about higher ed, right? And as I listened to the discussion, both this morning and this afternoon, we've all talked about how we see this value in it and what it reasons to enter the system of higher and deeper, right? But, and there's people that are watching who say, well, I can get that somewhere else. But what they can't get is the immersive part, right? Is where you come and this is what you're going to do for this period of time. Maybe that shifts somebody's decision-making a little bit, right? And maybe that's enough to change some perceptions, not for everybody, but it's I think we have to think about how are we, as Oakland University or as higher ed in general, how are we differentiating ourselves from what else is out there? What can we do that is different? And immersive is one of those things.
One of the things we talked about this morning, and it happens here, is providing more co-op opportunities for people who are studying a discipline to then work in that discipline. So they're not only studying in a theoretical way, but in a practical way, and they're building the skills that are necessary for that field, not necessarily the academic aspects of it, but the leadership aspects, the interpersonal aspects, and very few universities offer co-ops, or I think relatively few. But that seems to me a great way for immersive learning, to pair it with the classroom learning.
So I have a question for William and Cecilia, if you don't mind. I taught for many years the humanities, so I just have a simple question. How many times did you leave a class and you're walking out with your classmates and you're still talking about the classroom topic? Or you're staying up all night debating an issue? I mean, that's also, as Judith pointed out, part of the immersion. I mean, and where would you reproduce that experience if you didn't have a university to do it?
And part of it is being in that same physical space. If you're learning online like you would if you're watching YouTube tutorials on stuff, you're not doing that in a community. And a community of learning, I think, changes that. And to answer the question directly, half the time I've walked out talking with the professor about the class still. So it's when you get a community of people who are all interested in learning and they're all learning the same thing together, it's something that would be so hard to replicate outside of a physical environment where everybody is here to do the same thing.
I'd say with online learning, there are opportunities to replicate some of that engagement. And many argue that it's not exactly the same, and I don't think that's the intent of it, but there are opportunities to grow in that direction. I know in the courses that I teach, I make it a priority to engage with students through video, through audio of myself, just to help replicate some of that personal experience. So I know it's challenging to move in that direction. It's challenging to accept. You might have to change the way that you've taught in the past, but there's a lot of value that can be presented in fully online environments as well.
Practice your lawyering skills, Cecilia.
Well, to answer your question, I'm a psychology major, and I'm in my senior year, so a lot of my classes now are discussion based, and I found that as I progressed through my college career and I took more advanced classes, the classes became more and more interesting and more specific to what you want to learn. Whereas like my freshman year, I took Psych 1000, which is Introduction to Psych. Everybody takes that class. But now I'm like taking very specific classes, so I do find myself leaving these classes with like-minded people. It's very nice to be around like-minded people, because the people who are in my classes are people who want to be there, people who have persevered through college, are not there because, oh, I have to be here. This is one of my gen eds. No, this is a class you've worked towards. This is like a capstone class you've worked towards and you're here. So I've had times where I've left class and I've gone and talked to my classmates, annoyed my parents and my sister with what I've learned. Look at this, like, oh my gosh. But I think it really just stems from, one, you have to be very interested in your major, which is a good thing about college. You choose what you study. Being interested in what you study and having people who are also interested in what you study as well. It's very hard to talk to someone who doesn't want to hear a word about what you're studying, but being there with people who are in the same realm as you, although their futures might look different, you're in the same now. And so you get to talk to them. I think it's a big benefit of having in-person learning rather than online learning. Because on online learning, you're in a Zoom class and then leave room, and then you're like, okay, well, everybody's doing their own thing and I'm doing my own thing. But
I don't think technology will ever, and I said this morning, it's never going to replace the need and the impact of direct human contact. It just can't do it.
I agree with you, Sheila. And yes, there's definitely room for some hybrid, for some online learning. Certainly there's value in that. It makes me think about the pandemic. Hopefully 25 years from now, we're looking back saying it's still the pandemic, one of them. So it makes me think about the meetings we had during the pandemic on Zoom where we lost the conversations before and after the meeting. Where the meetings may have been awful, but we got value out of the conversations we had on the way in and the way out. And I'd hope the value proposition for universities 25 years from now still includes that human contact, because I think there's so much richness in that outside of the learning. And I think we learn how to navigate the world through that human contact, and university is a great place to be able to do that.
Well, right, I was thinking as we're talking about it that sometimes we're almost thinking that the way the tools and the world will speed up and the tools will change, that somehow we will move away from the importance of the human contact, but we all started our learning with human contact, and that will never change. I mean, you're born into a family, you have your parents, your siblings, your aunts, your uncles, whoever it is, and you start learning through interaction, and people are hungry for interaction. So the question will be how to, as has already been said, how the tools will change how we shape it, or how much of it we do, or in what context we do it. But I can't see it going away because people will hunger for it.
And with online learning, many people are still learning these tools. They're in the early stages of that. So online learning's been around for quite some time, but let's not mistake the response to the pandemic as quality online learning. I think we can understand and agree on that. So with working with faculty and working with students, we're a few years into many people adopting many of these tools. And the increase on our own online learning department has increased tremendously, and we invest a lot in helping instructors get to that point. We're leveraging more artificial intelligence to help with some of that demand, but I think that just a few years in, we're going to get more and more comfortable with that. And I agree, walking into meetings and chatting with people, I miss that aspect of things too, and we can't replicate that when we just unmute ourselves on a Zoom at 6:30 because that's what time our class starts. So finding some of that balance, maybe 25 years is enough time to explore some of that imbalance.
The improvisation is the humanity. That when you're connecting with someone, going to the meeting or after, or I'm sitting in my office and I have an idea and I run down the hall to tell someone else, that kind of improvisational work was very difficult. only online, because you kind of had to make an appointment and everyone had to be there at the same time. But the improvisation keeps the humanity going, of experience and each person's unique aspect. And that is so critical to education.
It is, and I think that from the K-12 lens, full transparency, we are still reacclimating and readjusting ourselves as educators in that space, as well as our students around, for example, social emotional learning, so that when they enter those higher ed spaces, they have those soft skills, they have those relational tools to be able to have productive struggle, engage in higher level conversations. So I think that we have made some great strides in that area, but we still are a work in progress.
I would just caution the table, though, to think of applying 25-year concerns on what technology and constraining it with what you know of technology for today. Technology may enable things that are wildly different than they are today. I think Gates had some kind of quote that suggested that the general population absolutely overestimates in which the speed of technology will diffuse, but wildly underestimates the effect of technology over the long haul. And I think he's pretty accurate in that. And for us to go from the idea of a placemaking, immersive, that was a fantastic term, and then only be able to say, well, let's compare and contrast that against online learning of today, and which one's better and how do we make that work. I think we're talking about a number of different things. I think we're talking about immersive, but we shouldn't define that immersive is only known as what immersive is today, but quality that immersive is something. And we talked about applied learning, which is co-op and whatnot. Immersive plus applied, now that's an interesting potential. And when we talk about the advancement of tools, we didn't use this word yet, but the apprentice style of who's the real master. When you ask a PhD or a master student to now become the professor and profess, who's the real master in the things, when things are moving as fast as they are? Is it the traditional PhD and traditional master, or is it more of an apprentice model of someone who's already out applying? And when you bring those three together and then think how technology can potentially enable something that's unique and different, we may find the purpose may be the same, but the application of it might look wildly different in 25 years. So,
and there could be a technology that replicates, that immersive experience. I mean, we have VR, AR that's emerging, and then kind of connecting with AI, and I think digital pedagogy too. Even with our present technology, as you know, Dan, a dedicated faculty member who's interested in student success can create a community in an asynchronous course, right? I mean, it'll be different from what William described, that community in the classroom, but that still can be approximated.
It's interesting because 25 years ago I was an undergraduate, and in my last year, a friend asked me, "Hey, have you heard of Google?" And that was the big disruptive force, in my time, in my education. So I did my bachelor's degree without any assistance from Google. However, for my master's and PhD, that was a tool that we were taught how to learn and how to leverage to try and get better quality results. And with things like artificial intelligence, we're still building some of those competencies and some of that understanding, because it impacts all of us in how we teach, how we learn, how we generate knowledge. What do we mean by knowledge?
For me, it was a pocket calculator.
Yeah.
You could use it in math and not have the world end.
I think that we are all really recognizing and know that 25 years from now, technology is going to be so different than it is now. The impact it has on people's everyday lives, the usage, the knowledge of it. And I think what we're also saying is, as that evolution occurs, that we don't want to sacrifice completely the other part that we believe brings so much long-term value, which is the human part of that, the values that we learn from that, the diversity of people that we can interact with that can't, because you talked about technology and we talked about that, how fast we can move from one geographical area to another, which means my classroom might be in Paris tomorrow. I'm with other people, but I'm not studying Paris on a screen. I'm physically sitting there, at the Eiffel Tower doing that, but it's going to change, but a blending and not sacrificing the human part as we progress through all of this advanced technology that I don't think we can even imagine what that's going to look like 25 years from now.
So what does that look like for a university like Oakland, who has great ties to this area, who knows its region, who brings its business community in and says, what training do we need here? You were talking at lunch, Dr. Pekovitz, about the number of grads that stay here in Michigan. But if we're not place-based, if it's no big deal to go to Paris for French class and then come back, and tomorrow I'm in the desert doing a archaeology class, and so what does that do to what we think of the university, and particularly the way it's structured?
Well, even in that case, wouldn't the university still be that place of continuing the learning outside the classroom, which we've all sort of talked about as such a critical feature, is what happens outside. And I actually agree. I taught an online class where I actually had to create that community. And these are K-12, but they're all still friends, and they got to know each other from across the world. So there are ways to do it. It's much, much harder. But if we're thinking about that sort of transcendence, that this isn't necessarily about modality, but it's still about making sure you have that, you can imagine the university still being that locus, right? That's what brings those all together for that outside of the classroom experience.
A convener.
It's the starting point, right? I mean, it's sort of a hub where, you begin here, and maybe there are some activities that happen with a group of individuals, and then some are sent off to Paris, and others are sent to Rome, and then some are sent to Sao Paulo, and you come back, and then you have a discussion about those things, right? So I think there's that centrality of a hub or a convener is it could be really powerful.
And I will say, David, we're getting ready to launch our new strategic plan, and I think it's prescient, but we are anticipating that. The name of our plan is Regional Focus Global Impact. And, we aren't necessarily anticipating this plan to predict 25 years, but it is to this point of hub and spoke, we know that we're a regional public university, but we're already envisioning that global impact, because that is the name of our plan. Regional focus, because we are regional. We definitely envision, as we spoke before, our community engagement. That's a deep part of our culture. We're deeply embedded in the community, but we are envisioning a global impact, which is a lot more than what we have been historically, and that is how we're envisioning the future. So I think it's interesting that you asked the question, but that does differentiate us from how we have seen ourselves really historically. And that's how we're moving into the future. And part of it has to do, I have to say, with AI and the computer era, something that we probably couldn't have done in Matilda's day, even though she, of course, had a big interest in Europe. But, but it wasn't realistic for a place like Oakland.
So if Oakland and other places like it are this hub and this convener, what does that do to the structure of higher education? What does it do to the structure of Oakland? Do we need, right now you have a college of business, and you have a medical school, and you have a honors, and you have all these individual places of school education. You have all these different colleges underneath the banner. If we're more of a convener and we're spreading out, we're coming back, do we need to change the core structure of the university, or does that still hold value?
I think to Cecilia's point, that you've got to be with people who share some core interest in some of this. So in that sense, I don't know if it looks the same, but you can imagine you still need your education students coming together, and you need your psychology students, and even within psychology subgroups, you still need that aspect even in a hub. Because those are the people who are going to share your passion. You're going to meet others as well, but those are the people who are going to share the passion.
There's still things that require physical assets.
Yes.
I mean, I'm an engineer, right? I mean, there is still a laboratory. During the pandemic, I was in safety engineering for General Motors. They still had to go to Milford to crash a car. I mean, you're not doing it virtually entirely because that's not a thing, okay? So there is still physical assets. So I think there's a hybrid nature that's just built in by that. And so you're building, in some aspects, you'll be building out from that physical reality that you have to have some place for some things.
And as we consider, what happens at a university, and Greg talked about it before, right? The university is could be separate from education. I think that's an interesting way to think about it. But there are things that happen at a university that contribute to the educational mission, like research, right? And you're in a lab that cannot be virtual, or maybe it can. I don't know.
It can't be.
Some can.
And I love something that you said earlier about getting people together, because what clicked in my mind was a capability or something that is being paid for through a university is a curation service. You're looking to folks to say, curate people like me. Curate people who are a little bit further along this path. Give me a safe space, a sandbox environment to test new ideas safely, because I can't do that in my applied place during my co-op because it's maybe a little too dangerous, because I'm actually trying to be operationally productive in those instances. So I think structurally, my opinion it would be is we need to potentially decompose what a university is into its pieces and reassemble them back up to be able to speak about them. And maybe they almost look the exact same, but when you stack them and you speak about them a little differently, value starts being recognized in a different way.
I like the trend that I've seen in certain universities of, when I was a graduate student at Penn, they had a humanities forum, and I think the University of Chicago has their collegium, where you're bringing together scholars from a lot of different fields, but asking them to put together courses that link their fields. So, art historian and a historian of medicine, to talk about paintings of a certain era. And I think that is very rich and encourages students to think broadly about directions that they might like to pursue that maybe they hadn't thought of before. And in fact, maybe those professors hadn't thought of it before. So I think to your point about, sort of the umbrella of the university with various colleges within it, I think if there's a way, again, to convene people from disparate disciplines and have them collaborate on something that they've never done, that increases the opportunity for everyone to learn, because I know I taught too, I learned as much from my students as I thought I gave to them. And, I think that is a very admirable path to pursue.
No, you go ahead.
Thanks. I think we see it in the Honours College all the time, because the Honours College here has every single major. CC's pre-law, Williams in the Honours College as well as computer science. You see people coming together like that and bouncing off. And I think it's what David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, the design firm, talks about, bringing together of more than one mind. And I think this is, again, back to what Greg was talking about, this idea of a space, a place, a kind of virtual environment in which more than one mind manages, as Judith is saying, to bounce off each other and kind of hear what other opinions are. So you do have the engineer that gets something from music, and you do have the pre-med student who realises something from philosophy, and you get those things working, bouncing off each other. And I think this idea of more than one mind in a virtual or physical space is fundamentally the university, right? That's what it is.
Ideally, yes, right? And I'm not sure we deliver on that all the time, right? And Cecilia used a phrase a while ago that got my attention. She said it was a group of like-minded people. Well, that's another element of this, is that it needs to not be like-minded people, right? I mean, where you do confront ideas that are challenging, that you do deal with things that make you uncomfortable in a sandbox atmosphere, right? Where the risks are much lower, right? Than if you're trying to do it in a co-op space where there's some repercussions to a mistake, right? Not so much when it's just sitting around a table talking about big ideas and big questions, right? So I think we have to think about moving forward. I mean, and all this has been just wonderful, right? But moving forward, not only what is great about a university, but what aren't we doing so well these days, right? And how can we improve that value proposition that I think we all worry about?
You brought up a good point about it being a safe space to experiment and the diversity of thought is critical in life, to be able to hear and include the voices of people that you might not necessarily agree with, but hear it and try to understand where it's coming from. And you may not be as far apart as you think that you are, but universities, colleges give you. I remember being in college and saying, I got 4 years to do this, because when I leave here, I got to be a grown up. So it's the experimentation and being able to take risk without getting fired, but just being who you are, but learning from other people and really being open. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that's what we're talking about, including and valuing the other voices at the table in a very safe place, but trying to understand them. And I do consider it I always considered it a safe space for me to experiment my thoughts and everything else. Those 4 years, I always knew you're never going to get these back. And there's never going to be another time in your life that's going to be like this. So do it now.
Well, and the bit about the diversity, when I was supervisor, I had this conversation with people when they were resisting coming back to work. And after, as the pandemic was easing. And the point I wanted to make for them, and I think a university, it's the place piece again, is that no matter how open to knowing and understanding diverse ideas or just diverse people who come from a different background than we do, no matter how open-minded we may be, proximity is a totally different thing. When I think about the number of people that I am friends with who are different races than I am, different backgrounds, different countries, different, whatever, I almost always met them at work, in person, or at school, in person. Because we are pursuing a common goal. It's washing out just enough of our differences that we're hearing each other, because we're trying to do the same thing, and we're trying to explain to each other, I didn't understand the lecture, what was that guy talking about, or what was that girl mean, and why did my lab thing turn out, and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, you see that person as a person, not as whatever stereotype you might have had when you came in. And proximity does that, because the casual does that. On Zoom, I can mute them. Or I can mute myself. Or I can make it so you don't see my face when I didn't like what you just said. But I can't do that in a room.
But even, we didn't talk about this, but as an academic, how does curriculum shape that? So as we're building, majors and new majors and looking for hot markets, like cannabis something, whatever is going to get 100 majors. As we build those courses, are we building them, to Graham's point, where students are connecting outside those narrow interests and being exposed to other intellectual interests, but also in those settings that you described, Kathy, where they're going to meet students who have a different perspective, or a different take on it, or even a different disciplinary perspective. I taught a literature and psychology course, and I was trying to argue that, Freud saw himself as a scientist. The student raised her hand and said, well, I'm a chemist, I'm a scientist. And then a student raised his hand and said, well, I'm a physicist, I'm a physics student, you're not a scientist. So, they're all competing over, who's a scientist. But it was kind of a good-natured conversation, but it was a gen ed course. But in their majors, they weren't meeting other students from other backgrounds. Now, honors is set up actually to overcome that problem. But how can we do that across the university for students?
At lunch, we talked about people switching careers and having varying careers. And I've actually been in numerous careers before I got to this one, which has been very pleasurable, by the way. But I did spend 17 years in 2 different Research One institutions overseeing research. During that time, I spent a lot of time trying to understand creativity and how do you maximize creativity to maximize research productivity. And I want to play on some of the things that several of you said in the last couple of comments that you made, because during that time that I was trying to maximize research productivity and research funding at these 2 major R1 institutions, one of which is in this state, and has today $2 billion in research funding, at least as of this week. I really worked hard to do exactly what several of you said, and that was to bring people together from different disciplines, because the fastest shortcut to increasing research productivity is to do exactly what several of you said. And so what I would do would be to bring people from different disciplines who were extremely creative and extremely productive in their own research fields, but to solve problems that they had been thinking about for a very long time, but were stuck in that approach that they had to a solution. And they might have been a physicist or a chemist or a biologist or a poet, but to bring them together to try to identify a solution to a problem. And even though they had attempted to address that problem in every way they knew in their own field, when they came together to try to address it, knowing everything they knew in their own area, when you brought them together, they brought a lot of creativity because they approached it from their respective areas. So I think that this point about bringing together people from different domains and different subject areas really does demonstrate, extremely productive, creative, and innovative and entrepreneurial approaches. And I want to turn that around and address it from the prospective side in terms of David's question about what does it mean for the future. Because when I think about what maybe the future holds in terms of higher educational institutions, are we going to continue to be structured from an infrastructure perspective the way we are, or does that knowledge about productivity and creativity and innovation and discovery going to hold true for how we're structured prospectively? I do think that we may change how we're structured with respect to one another. And we keep talking about this all the time, in terms of institutions. Are we going to restructure ourselves? Are we going to consolidate? Are we going to reorganize? Are we going to have institutions, for example, here in Michigan, are we going to decrease the number of institutions and reorganize in a different way? Do we have too many of one kind, or are we going to restructure differently? And I think that when you think about maximizing creativity and productivity, there might be better ways for us to structure ourselves so that we can maximize. When we think about being disruptive, and what happened in this room in 1958, we might ask ourselves, not just how do we restructure Oakland to maximize productivity, but are there ways to restructure and think about how we relate to other higher educational institutions so that we can maximize what we want to accomplish, which is disruptive to maximizing, I think, the 2 major things we're talking about: education, research, and then I add the third one, community engagement, so that we can do that even better. And, I think that's a fair question we should be asking ourselves.
We spent time talking about things, the advantages, the good things that universities do. Let's flip it on its head a little bit. What are some of the things that we take for granted, or the way universities operate now, that need to go either completely goodbye or be diminished in some ways? What needs to happen to keep these things, the good things we've been talking about, going?
How much time do you have? I'm just kidding.
You can call me afterwards, and I write stories for a living, and I'm happy to talk for hours.
I mean, I think that we start with, we talked this morning about trust in higher ed, confidence in higher ed, and I think that has declined. Well, not I think, I know that we all know that has declined over time, right? And I think we have to start by asking, why is that? And address some of those things, right? Because we can sit around and talk all the time about these great things that a university can be and is, right? But we also have to deal with the fact that we're in a highly competitive era in higher ed, right? And we have a market that we have to respond to in some ways, not totally, but in some ways we have to respond to the market, right? So what are our customers? And some folks that are watching are going to hate me for using that term, but that's what they are, right? What are our customers responding to positively and negatively? And I think that takes some thinking and takes some honest self-reflection.
Well, cost is number one.
And cost is part of it, absolutely.
It's absolutely number one. I talk to people who are in higher ed now, as I was preparing for this, who are working and have spent their whole career in it. They clearly, cost is number one, and that's what gets, it's not a trust as much as it is the value of higher ed when you weigh the cost of it to the debt on the back end, and is the ROI is what they're looking at, and therefore we've got a major problem there. I don't know how to solve that, but I know that is clearly, and when you think about debt, student loan forgiveness programs, and then they're here, they're not here, and whether if I get a loan and I do public service and you can forgive it, and then you may take that away from me, it makes people say there's another way for me to make a living and be successful without the expense of higher ed, though we see the value of what higher ed can bring in terms of the structure around it, the collaboration, the diversity of thought, all of that. The cost is a major issue right now.
Right, so then what can we do about that, right? And that's that obvious, and if we all had the answer to that,
I know.
we'd fix it.
I know.
But we look at why has that occurred, right? Well, over time, at least in Michigan, through Republican and Democratic administrations, the state of Michigan has not invested in higher education. And the president will correct me if I get this wrong, right? But in 1975-ish, Oakland University got 75% of its revenue, maybe more, from state appropriations, and roughly the last 25% from student tuition. Now it's over 80% from student tuition and less than 20% from state appropriation, right? So as a public institution that I think is bound by duty to do stuff for the public good, we've been ignored in many ways, right?
So I'm curious. I'm not educated on this, but I have to assume. I mean, I went here as an undergrad many years ago. As I said this morning, there were dirt roads here, and I went here. But the number of students that were here was a lot smaller. So I think my general intuition is that higher ed as an industry has been seeking to grow and grow and grow, and more students, larger percentage of the population getting to Graham's point, higher and deeper into topics. And the question I have is, so you talk about the customer probably as a student, perhaps. Mm-hmm. There's also the customer of who's going to accept the students afterwards. And to me, you can't look at this problem only inside the university or the higher ed institution aspect. You have to go and look at things like maybe in the K-12 or specifically in vocational pieces. I think there's choice. And so right now, you used to speak to the incoming student body and say, you have to come to college, you have to come to higher ed in order to have a good career in front of you, in order to make the money. And what's proving out is that equation, that promise is broken, because you have to pay a lot of money in order to get into one of these institutions, but the return on life may not be there. And so there seems to be alternatives that says, well, you know what, I'm going to go be a plumber. I'm going to go be a tradesman. I'm going to go be a computer scientist that doesn't require, or maybe I'll be a computer technician that doesn't need the theory on top of it. And there's more of a guarantee path to return, and the cost of entry on that is way lower. So I think that if one of the structural elements we need to take a look at is beyond just the university structure itself, is what percentage of population, what jobs are going to be necessary in the next 25 years? What percentage of those that will require a higher ed type of education? And is that okay? Can we give permission to the world that says, perhaps maybe we've overbuilt this industry, now we need to do some consolidation of this industry and allow for a portion of this to be educated somewhere else, and that's good. There's a good in that, not that we're pulling away from folks. I don't know, I mean, in this environment, that's probably not a public or a real popular statement, but I think we have to look at the system a little larger than just the institution.
So I think there's another way to ask that, which is who values this education beyond those of us who are in higher ed? So, I mean, kind of what you're asking is like, where is this valued? Because that's where you have to look to say, okay, if this really is valued, then that's the support you need to show to students that this is where the degree is important. And I agree with you. Like, we've gotten to a place where we say, you know, everyone should go to college. I heard that a lot when I was first getting into, you know, the academic world. That's not really true for everything. We've heard other pathways, even just talking casually with each other today, and those are not invalid, right? We those have a value too, but we have to understand those values as well. And again, I think it comes down to who values this kind of education. And I certainly don't think we know that answer richly at this point.
In K-12, we don't talk about it in terms of you have to go to college. I mean, that's not what we preach. It's career, it's military, it's university, it's something else. We actually in Oakland County have 4 technical campuses that are connected, that are free, and we send welders out into the world after high school making $100,000 a year. Given that choice, they're probably not going to university, right? They're going into the world making $100,000 a year. We send a lot of students from our technical campus into universities and colleges, but we don't preach you have to go to college. I mean, it's not for those students who really value that, who have those skills that I certainly don't have, they can walk out and have a successful career, whatever happiness they can have, right? I mean, where you could go to law school, and sink considerable money in and not become an attorney, or not enjoy being one. So I think there is more than going to university, and maybe some of that is overbuilt.
Yeah, I think in particular, you know, to your point about who is the population we're serving, if you think about, I think that we can all see obviously that the education that leads to the professions, law school, engineering, nursing, doctor, you know, to be a doctor, medical doctor, those are obvious. You have to go for higher education, they're deep fields, you have to do what you have to do in order to get the credential. And then there's a group of, and then when you look at the liberal arts and the enrichment portions that we've talked so much about, perhaps quite a few of the people that are pursuing the professional education are willing to add on, because they're already putting in a bit of investment, they're willing to add on, it's the well-rounded, it's going to help me anyway, I'm going to be out in the world. But now when you talk about the people who are going to pursue their education in some of the softer skill areas, it's what you talked about this morning, Cecilia, with the risk. Now there is a more substantial risk that it doesn't pay back because of the price. And that's the situation where perhaps that pool is maybe permanently smaller if we can't figure out how to address the cost.
I think we have to actually make sure we know the data here, because there are very significant data, some of which I'm not sure we're really reflecting. So first of all, on the cost, which several of you have alluded to, the very high cost of a college education. So since we're here at Oakland, we should really talk about the Oakland data. And it's important to know that 57% of our students graduate with no debt whatsoever. Secondly, if a family earns less than $70,000 a year, the student goes to Oakland and pays zero tuition at Oakland. So you can tell them not to go to college, that they don't have to go to college, but if the family is earning less than $70,000 a year, they won't have to pay tuition to come to Oakland. And if they don't graduate, then that's a problem because they will have wasted our money, our money meaning your money, the citizens' money, and our money because we've also invested in that, and their time. They could have been a welder, but if they do graduate, I want to talk about not only the individual's benefit, which apparently you talked about this morning, that they got, the potential to earn $1 million or more over the course of a life, but I didn't hear that you had mentioned the societal benefit, because one of the things that's important to mention, and I think about this a little bit the way I think about herd immunity. I'm sorry, but I am a physician. So not only does an individual benefit when they're immunized, but when communities are immunized, when a lot of people are immunized, the community is benefited by that. So in other words, you're not the only one that benefits when you get an immunization, but the rest of the community is benefited because there's something called herd immunity. Everybody else is benefited because then the rest of the community doesn't get measles. So even if your child didn't get immunized, your child is likely to benefit because the rest of the people immunized their child against measles. The same is true that if you live in Oakland County here, where we have a very high percent, our goal is to have 80% of the population get a college degree by 2030, and we're already above 60%. We have a very high cost of living. We vote at a higher percent, and we're the 9th wealthiest county in the country. Because why? I don't want to say that it's 100%, but it's highly correlated with the education of the citizens. So I think like a doctor, but it's similar to herd immunity. In other words, even the people that didn't have college degrees benefit from the fact that the rest of the people that live here that have college degrees have the benefits of being among an educated citizenry. The same is true in Michigan and Washtenaw County, which also has a very high percent of an educated citizenry. And the counties in Michigan that have the lowest percent of an educated citizenry have the worst economic populace and the lowest voting rates. You can correct me on this, David, because you're an expert on voting.
The correlation is high, yes.
But the correlation is high. And so there are benefits, and I'll speak to one other benefit. Health benefits are also correlated with the educational degrees of the citizens that live there. So there are many correlates beyond just the benefits to the one individual, but also to their families. So, with respect to the costs, I just want to go back to that for a moment. For our students here at Oakland, we ensure that for the majority of our students, and by the way, I don't know what you said that you've got a full tuition.
Not full tuition.
Oh, not full.
Which is not full tuition anymore, but is $12,000 a year.
Okay, so, and how about your?
My family qualifies for the full tuition, so we make on the lower end, so I have full tuition scholarships coming in every year.
So if you were to survey our students, most of our students, and by the way, it's true for the majority of students, and by the way, Michigan, had you gone to Michigan, they've now raised it to $120,000. hoping we can get to that. We don't have enough, financials. We don't have a $19 billion endowment. When we get that, we're going to do that here too. But so the cost of education, when you think about the cost of education, where it costs that much, we're talking about where I went to school, Northwestern, and other major elite institutions and I graduated, by the way, from medical school with a very significant amount of debt. But I graduated and I became a doctor. And by the way, not a very high paying doctor, pediatrician. So it did take me a long time to pay it off. But it's true, but I was a physician. So it's true in the professional schools, but it's not really true across the board. So there is this sort of, and if you look at the debt, the issue for debt is in the professional schools and for the students who don't graduate. In other words, some college, no degree. That's where the issue is significant, and for certain degrees. And that's where there is a problem. But it's not true across the board.
I think you make a very good point. I'd like to, just in the context of South Dakota, the university, I think, contributes over $1 billion to the state economy.
That's correct.
And so when you think about society's investment, the industries, the agricultural industries that rely on precision agriculture, or the airline industry, that needs pilots. We have an aviation program. I mean, all the benefits that come from the university's programs and research, that sort of goes unnoticed in terms of the public good and the benefits. So I think one part of it is the student debt. I mean, we hear about that. But the others, I don't think people really are aware of how much research universities, but all community colleges too, contribute to the economic well-being of their local communities, but also the national economy.
And to the president's point there about cost at a place like Oakland, there are information asymmetries out there, right? Where and folks in the community, folks in the market, they are making some assumptions. And I imagine that I'm making an assumption myself, right? That they hear about the high cost of college. They hear about the sticker price, right? And they don't end up getting far enough to find out that at Oakland University, if you make less than $70,000, you can go for nothing, right? I think that is, so maybe we've just got a big PR job to do, right? And I think that there's some about that. We have to crow about those benefits, right? We have to talk about the absolutely.
And we're happy to support that in the K-12 realm. I mean, as a superintendent of the county, I didn't know that. And that's a big deal. Yeah. And that's something that we need to share with students even younger than high school.
It's interesting that you bring up the sticker price and the discounts that the president was talking about. Maybe a month or so ago, the Chronicle reporters were all together and we were talking about various story ideas and things we want to pursue. And one of the editors asked, when people find out you cover higher education, what do they ask you about? And it was always what's the number one issue? And all around the room, I don't know, the 30 of us in the room, it was cost high because of not places like this, because of where the focus is, and then sticker versus actual. How do I know what I'm going to pay? A comparison, right, between it's going to cost me this much money to go to U of M, this much to go to Oakland, and this much to go to U of D Mercy, right? 3 different schools, 3 different payments. Right?
There's an element there, Dave, because I think this is really an interesting point about perception versus reality, and Aura's kind of touched on that a little bit too. Statistic recently I found, and I was amazed by this, net price calculators, which are really essential. Like if you're out in the community, maybe you're first generation, and Cece talked about first generation students, maybe you're not. But to know what the actual price is, to really genuinely know it, right, you need to have that net price calculator available to you. And Oakland is religious about that. We have that on our website, we make sure it's available. But apparently only 59% of institutions do. which then made me think, wait a minute, what do the people know with these other 41% of institutions, if that is actually a true figure, about how you work out the cost? And you know for a fact that in some institutions that cost is going to involve parking and, you know, whatever cost of accommodation on campuses or whatever else. There's going to be costs there. Put it on the web, show what it is, make sure the public knows about it. And then, of course, you can work out value from there on in. You can work out if it's good value. But if you've got no calculation or way of doing it, how do you even know? You know,
I'm just thinking about how absolutely important what you just said really is, because I learned something today from what you just told us, Aura, and I think to myself, in the macro sense, I'm just thinking totally macro here, then why in the hell are we paying off people's student loans at billions of dollars? They probably should have gone to some place that was going to offer them a more affordable education.
And a very good one.
I mean, these are people who made choices that they now think other people are going to pay for, but they had other choices. I mean, I think I was accepting sort of on face value that college is really expensive everywhere, and so this was just like a relative problem. But that's not what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I didn't think that, you know, to be honest, I was not, I mean, this is just between us, but I wasn't in favor of paying off my daughter-in-law's medical school loan. She had a $250,000 medical school debt, but she got it forgiven.
The first 7 years of my career here at OU were spent in student financial aid. And you come to have a lot of difficult conversations. And oftentimes, against the best advice you could give a family, they would still choose to take out loans, parent loans. Those are hard decisions to see people making in real time when you understand the long-term implications. I also had to take out sizable amounts of loans to get myself through undergraduate education, loans that in November were finally forgiven. After working here for 20 years in the programs that were in place, I met my obligations. So I see value in those programs because oftentimes in education, you take a pay cut, whereas if you go into industry, there's a higher starting salary. I love my career in higher ed. I wouldn't trade that, for anything, the things that I've learned here, but just understanding a number of people coming into the doors in financial aid, parents and students alike lack financial literacy. They don't have the resources to have those discussions. And I don't know if you've read the federal aid policy, but it's extensive. It's thick. And on top of that, you've got state policy, institutional policy, perhaps scholarships that hang in the balance there. So it's not always just one easy number that we can hone in on. Are you commuting? Are you going to live at home? And most 18-year-olds are ready to not live at home. So it's a more complex than what is the cost and what is the return on that investment, is that, are you prepared to make that tough choice with the information that you have on that point? And asking someone who is 17 or 18 years old to shoulder that burden at that time, that's a lot to ask.
I want to add on the topic about costs, and we've been mostly talking about the benefits that you experience after you're done with college. But as I mentioned this morning, Will and I conducted a survey asking college students here at OU about their opinions on 5 different topics, and we got responses from freshmen through seniors. 2 of the topics discussed was cost of higher education and student needs during college. On the topic of cost of higher education, it was all across the board. Everybody was talking about how the cost of higher education is very, very high. Some people qualify for getting a lot of aid, some people don't, and they need to take out loans. And then on that same realm, on the student needs portion, people were talking about for how much that they need to invest in college. They don't necessarily get that back in what they experience in college. And there's been a large discussion on we need to see more involvement. Because OU is a large commuter school, and I'm a commuter, it's been very seen that, you go to classes and you leave and that's it. A lot of people just go to classes and leave, and they want to be more involved in school, in the campus environment. And so I feel like a discussion that needs to be had either now or in the future for the future of the universities. How can we help students see that the cost of higher education is being put back directly into their needs during college? We see how after college they experience benefits, but it's so hard for students to see those benefits, those future benefits. They want to see at least something a little bit now.
Oakland has done a good job in trying to help contain cost, whether it's looking for affordable courses, textbook materials. For example, we've done a good job with trying to be creative and finding programs to re-engage students who may have stopped out, or to help. So I think that we are aware of that issue and trying to mitigate it in many ways. It's also a slow process, as many changes are, and it's hard to, when we talk about the cost, we have to think about students who leave campus because they have to go to work, because they need that additional money to maybe pay for their books that next semester or to pay for that tuition. So there are more reasons because of cost that will pull students off that campus, and that impacts the opportunity to participate in cultural events, to gain a better understanding of diversity and the big community that you really are a part of here at OU.
On your second point, were students looking for an earned credential during their 4 years? Like, instead of waiting till they graduate to get their degree, are they looking for something, maybe an industry certificate or something to kind of to mark their way toward their final degree?
That's not what I got from the results of the survey. It was more just they don't necessarily want to see like a place marker, but more so they want to see more, like, let's say on-campus events or more
Activities.
Yes, more activities. They want to see more involvement with the university. Somebody mentioned that like there's a lack of a football team here at OU, and so there's that lack of. And I know we can't change that, but there's
Matilda did not want a football team.
Yeah. So people talk about how because of that there is a lack of this like OU, what's the word, passion, this
Spirit.
Yeah, student spirit, yes. So they want to see more of, well, we don't have that football team. They want to see how can OU do more for the students to have that student liveliness, to see people on campus and see engagement. Because if one person engages, the next person will engage, and the next person will engage, and the next person will engage. But there needs to be a starting point, and these students are too, I guess, afraid to be that starting point, so they want to see the university be the starting point for them, if that makes sense.
We have wonderful basketball teams, don't forget that.
Yeah.
Yes, fun basketball games.
Starting tonight, we got a really good one tonight. But that's wonderful that you did the survey. I applaud you for doing that survey, and I'd love to see it, by the way. But as a follow-up, if you could ask, besides football, because we do have club football, by the way, but what other activities they would like to see, because it would be very helpful for us to know. Because if we know, maybe we are able to offer them. And so it would be helpful. But I think several of us would love to see the survey. So if you could show it to us, that would be great. And as I say, as a follow-up, I'd love to see if you could ask them what kinds of activities, because there are a lot of activities that are offered, and maybe one problem is we don't advertise them, and another is maybe we don't know what the students want. So please share that survey with us, and also let us know if there are additional things we should be offering.
And on the advertising part of it, I just want to put in some little thing. Over the years, because I've been here for a few years now, I've gotten more involved. But when I was a freshman, I feel like there is a lack of advertisement. Yeah. When I was a freshman, I wasn't aware of all that Oakland University had to offer because it wasn't really advertised. Like, one thing is that I'm a part of a sorority on campus. When I joined OU, I had no idea that there was any Greek life on campus until someone reached out to me via social media and was like, "Hey, you want to join?" I was like, "What are you talking about right now?" And then now I'm here. But we've also realized, like, us in like my sorority and in the Pan-Hellenic Association, Greek Life Association, we've realized that there is a lack of outreach to people and to like because people go to universities for the education, but also for what the university offers them outside of education. So I feel like we could move forward in helping advertise, outside of our education, what else do we offer? Our basketball team, March Madness last year, so fun, so cool. What else do we offer on campus? Clubs, activities, sports.
I mean, that gets you back to your initial question, Dave, about that whole experience. It's not just the academics, it's not just the career planning, but it's everything that's part of a student's life experience in their 4 years or 5 years.
So the people that gathered here in the original one of these sessions, they were working from pretty much a blank slate. We're not today. We're sitting on a campus. We've heard some discussion here about it. But let's pretend for the last few minutes we have together today that it is a blank slate. That we're starting we're starting Jesse University. And what should it look like? What should we do? Let's dream a little bit. What should a university be if we weren't constrained by anything already existing?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is a discussion I had with Dean John Marjoram Lays here at Oakland University. He's our Dean for the School of Education and Human Services. And oftentimes we hear School of Education. Well, on the building it says Education and Human Service. And he reminded me of the importance of that and the value in stating that it's human service. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that we're in service of humans through education, through technology, through discussions like these. But human-centered should be at the start of it.
What else? Starting from scratch.
Let's say that upon graduation, maybe a promise to have to know what you're walking away with. So it's clear that you have a piece of paper, and it's clear that that piece of paper represents some kind of accredited journey through subject matter, which is kind of the standard. But I don't know if that's enough anymore, I guess. And so kind of looking at it from both the father of a current college student as well as as an employer, someone who hires Oakland grads and just graduates of education. I would love to see beyond that they come out with some kind of representation of a personal advisory board. So not walking away just as an individual, but when I hire that individual, that they come surrounded by others. That can be classmates, that can be mentors that have been introduced to them at some point, but some kind of representation that says, when I get Sam plus some folks that are helping him continue on a journey. That'd be one. Two, I look at these eras of, industrial era and, maybe the information or internet era, and we talked this morning about the intelligence era. And if you look backwards, some of those eras represent, you walked away with more physical tools. When it was a physical thing, tradesmen come with an actual bag of tools, literally. You mentioned the calculator, engineers, kind of in the information age, we walked away with things like programmable calculators, maybe, and the use of particular engineering softwares that we could apply. I think that having my goal, my dream right now, at least for my son, would be that he would walk away with a personalized AI assistant that scales him, that he doesn't have to have the responsibility of all this in his mind, but potentially the ability to walk away with an assistant that will help him apply all these learnings over the 4 or 5 years. And the last thing is a responsibility of mentor. So I guess that advisory board both ways. I'd love some people that are above him, that have been assigned to him to help him continue to drive, but also some mentees to say, if as an employer, if I hire a young man or woman, they will also be a pipeline for me because they have roots into this university, and it's substantial. Not just they got lucky with it, but it's been encouraged along the way. So I'm looking for physical, tangible assets that the human would come away with.
I really like Greg's list. Yeah, I totally agree with it. So I'll put my administrator hat on. I would say, if we're starting an institution from the ground up, I would say find a way to build into the structure
the ability to innovate and change. And it would be a structural feature. And so, Graham knows what that means, in terms of whether it's a curricular change or whatever it is, that the institutions wouldn't be so slow to accommodate current demands and the need to change. Very abstract.
I think field work, as a MSW, that's a Master's in Social Work, and congratulations on OU having one now for 3 years straight. But I think the value of field work was just incredible. But not all disciplines, I don't think, have that. So thinking how valuable it is that we would imagine that for all students. And I think the other is just never taking for granted, not that this is done here, but our stakeholders in the community, and just this perpetual outreach, listening, just interpreting changing market forces, what people need, and then having that adaptability to meet that need. Only 2 on my list.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say, I agree with, and I'm really fascinated with stuff you said, Greg, and also just to add to that I'd like to see a diverse student body and diverse faculty, so that the richness is achieved on both sides of that table.
Sure. Ideologically diverse and physically diverse.
Yes, both.
Yes.
Both. I think it's important to in shaping your own ideas. I think ethically, racially diverse, I absolutely want that. But I also think the thing that sticks with you also is learning from them, but also being able to hear and be challenged in your thinking by somebody who doesn't necessarily think like you. It either solidifies what you thought, or it helps you think and see something a different way. So I think that in higher ed, I think that is critical, that you are around people who challenge your thinking. And I think that's what higher ed does for us, is challenges our thinking.
Yeah, I think that's true, Sheila, and I think that mine's much more sort of narrow in terms of concept, but I think it relates to that. And the project-based learning, the undergraduate research that we do, where we've got mentorship bedded into it, so you've got people interacting in that sense, and you're also being challenged, and it's at one-to-ones, often one-to-one in terms of how it works, and people are learning about each other because they're working closely together. You've got professors that are committed to helping students learn through that process of mentorship. It very much does expose you to all the things that can happen when you're in a social space like that, and I think that does also include getting diverse viewpoints in there. So I love the project-based undergraduate research side, and interestingly enough, it was in some of the discussions back in 58, 59 about, the professors should always be close to the students. There shouldn't be barriers between our folks that are teaching and researching and the folks that are you're mostly learning and beginning to research. So I think that also brings out those multiple viewpoints in that experience.
One word that we've used a few times I think applies here, and that's discovery, right? And that just, to allow somebody to have the opportunity to figure it out.
Yeah.
And to know that it's okay if you come here and don't know what you want to do, right? Yeah. And discover that, right? Whether that's in terms of discipline or discovery related to research, that it can apply so many different ways. And I think that is really what makes, a university experience immersive and different.
I told you before, I love discovery. I think of discovery, I think of you, Graham. So, I just think it's fascinating, and people shouldn't be scared, especially students should not be afraid to do it. You don't have to have it figured out. You just got out of high school. You're on a journey. Your parents may think they've got it figured out, but this is your life. You don't have to have it figured out, and go through this journey of discovering who you are and what life means to you and what brings you passion. It's a phenomenal journey, and so you're right. I can't absolutely underscore how important that is.
If we're dreaming together, I'll throw one more thing out, maybe to your point of you want more connections at the university. So when I attended here many years ago, I used to call it the Michigan MSU syndrome, where basically you pull either your Michigan or your MSU cap on as tight as you can down to your eyes, walk to class, and then walk back to your vehicle. And that was the experience. And if we're dreaming, what I'd love is for there to be a mandate for freshmen to live on campus or live on a freshman-only campus, to force the bonds. And after that, go wherever you want. Go home, go to an apartment, but some kind of way to force that first year of separation, work-life balance, exploration, discovery together as a cohort. And my guess is a lot of these other nuances will just kind of work themselves out.
I love that.
In addition to my work for the Chronicle, I also teach a journalism class in the fall at a small liberal arts college, and I often tell my students the most important question. There's one question you should ask at the end of every interview, and so I'll ask it here. What didn't we cover? This is your. We just have a couple seconds left, couple minutes left. So, just in one sentence, is there something that's you've been dying to get out? If not, that's fine, and we'll turn to the camera and wave goodbye. But yep.
So Victor earlier mentioned the notion of higher ed ecosystem, and I don't think that we've really thought what that means, and that seems like something that, to know how Oakland is going to be distinct, you need to know where it fits in a bigger ecosystem. We see that in K-12 too, we have that same problem. But I think that notion of an ecosystem is really important to defining the goals of any one institution.
Yeah, I was thinking if we were starting from scratch, would we have everything that Oakland has today? Or would we focus, just the way things are today, would we focus a little bit more on having certain curricula or certain departments, but then following on to your idea, would we get the enrichment from a neighboring university that is they have a focus group on such and such. And so if you want to take for your Gen Ed class something on, history or something that Oakland doesn't have that, you could just do that from Wayne State and it would count as an Oakland credit and away you'd go, and then, you'd be able to have some economies of scale, which I think are going to become increasingly important.
I would say this one quick thing, the importance of philanthropy. A solid donor base can transform an institution very quickly. And especially today with state, as was pointed out earlier, state funds drying up for people with means to step forward to support higher education.
There's one, I don't know if we've used it, David. It's kind of interesting because and it's just been fabulous, and I just want to say thank you to everybody here for bringing such a diverse range of viewpoints and coming from such different backgrounds and bringing something to the table. And what it's been is that word partnership, right? And I think a lot of what we've talked about is partnership. I don't know if we've used the word partnership. I know that at Oakland we're very committed to the idea of partnership with community, partnership with industry and so on. But I think what we've had, and maybe we haven't said it so much because we're doing it. This is like the sort of thing that we'd encourage, where there are perspectives and there is a relatively flat discussion where it's not a case of, hey, here's a hierarchy, here's the institution, we look down and say, what would you like us to deliver from above? We're saying, let's talk as a partnership about what we can do, students, faculty, staff, and community, industry, and in that sense, I think we've probably not said it that much because we're doing it. But yeah, I think partnership's one word we maybe haven't brought up quite enough.
I'm going to say this we didn't talk about it earlier, but I'm going to say this so the audience doesn't say, they're not even going to mention that. We're very much aware of what's happening now in our country and the issues around DEI, the issues around federal funding and all that. And I just want the audience to understand it's not that we aren't aware of it. We did not want it to take up oxygen in our planning for the future of higher ed. I personally don't think it will be here 25 years from now, that I think that we are strong enough as a country to make sure that we have diversity, that we include people's voices and all of that. And we didn't want to take the oxygen at this table and let it consume our planning. But I didn't want the audience to think that we have not thought about that and that that's not important to us, because it is.
Well said, and I think that's a good note to end on. And so I will thank the table for coming, and it's been an interesting day full of great conversation. Thank you to those of you who tuned in, whether you're doing so now, or a week from now, or 6 years from now. And good luck. We'll see you down the road.
I thought that was fabulous.
That was great. Not enough. Really great.
So are we all going to move into their house together? Is that the plan? It feels like it should be. There's rooms upstairs. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you all so much.
Who's cooking it? Hopefully not me.
That's what I do.